Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityananda Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pachanani Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pajadesh Dharani Shubhova. Okay, so we're reading from Prabhupada Lilamrita, and just open the page where the bookmark is. So there's 3 dots on this side marking a new section. So I'll just go from there. Abai preached actively in Kanpur, staying in various homes and canvassing for league members. As a guest of the Anand Ishwara Satsang Mandal, he lectured regularly at the popular Paramat bathing ghat on the Ganges. He especially made acquaintances among industrialists and educators, often sitting and conversing with them for hours, and many were impressed by his dedication and his soft-spoken talks. But his collections were small. When he offered the wealthy magnates his constitutional membership, they usually opted in favor of the 2 rupee a year subscriber membership. He collected a few letters of appreciation, but after 2 months, he left. After some months in Vrindavan, Abai decided to go back to Bombay and preach. In Bombay, he quickly broke off his association with the stifling Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, and moved out of the faculty residence there, staying a week at a time in the homes of various patrons. He tried to generate interest in his missionary activities. When a friend of Acharya Prabhakar's arranged for Abai to address Sunday evening crowds at a Bombay beach, Abai accepted. Following already established custom, he sat on a cushion and the people gathered, from 500 to 1,000, sitting and listening, as he loudly spoke the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita. Abai spoke for several nights, and there were other lecture opportunities also. One week he spoke several times at a Bombay Vishnu temple. But Abai wanted to do more than deliver occasional lectures to uncommitted audiences. The conviction was growing within him that he should preach outside India. The idea, of course, had been there for some time. He had expressed it in his prospectus for the League of Devotees, before gatherings at the Radha Memorial in Jhansi, during his meeting at the Birla Mandir in Delhi, and on many other occasions. Informally, he had expressed it hundreds of times to acquaintances, and he had woven his dream throughout his writings. He was ready to travel anywhere if he could fulfill Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's order to preach in English. In India, the English-speaking population was small, so Abai continued to dream of going to the West. If he could travel to Bombay, Delhi, and Kanpur, why not to London or New York, where millions spoke English and had never heard the message of Lord Chaitanya? Writing to Mr. Ved Prakash, a Kanpur industrialist, Abai explained his idea. Quote, Lord Chaitanya said, Praninam upakaraya, i.e., to say, for the benefit of all living being concerned, while rendering first aid service in the battlefield, the Red Cross men, although equally disposed to all the wounded soldiers, they gave first preference to the hopeful ones. The hopeless ones are sometimes neglected. In India, even after the attainment of Swaraj, the mentality is predominant by made in London ideas. It is a long story. But in a nutshell, the leaders of India, in the name of secular government, they have engaged themselves in everything foreign. They have carefully set aside the treasure house of India's spiritual asset, and they are imitating the Western material way of life, constantly engaged in the acts of error, of judgment, misgivings, imperfectness, and duplicity. India's Vedic knowledge is above all the conditional defects mentioned above. But we Indians, at the present moment, have neglected such wonderful Vedic knowledge. It is due to its improper handling. This Vedanta Sutra is presented in India by unauthorized persons of different camps, and as such, the people are being misguided. Newly sprung up national enthusiasm of the Indian leaders, industrialists, and plan makers have no time nor the desire to understand the message of Vedanta Sutra or even the Bhagavad Gita. You cannot do acts of humanity without proper guidance. So my idea of preaching in the foreign countries means that they are rather fed up with material advancement of knowledge. They're seeking the message guidance of the Vedanta Sutra for the matter of the Bhagavad Gita in an authentic way. And I am sure India will again go back to spiritual life when the principle is accepted by the Europeans, Americans, etc. Because the Indian people are now in the habit of begging after neglecting their own property. That was my point of view. But all the same, we must take up only the opportunity of service. Srila Prabhupada ki. And next, to hear Srila Prabhupada's expression, perception of the situation. Interesting how he says, and I am sure India will again go back to spiritual life when the principle is accepted by the Europeans, Americans, etc. And he said, and earlier, Dasvut Maharaj, he, somewhere there was a comment that not many people were speaking English in India at that time. Yeah. But now we see in India many people, so many people speak English. Everyone speaks English, right? English is taught in all the schools. Yeah, in India, English-speaking population is small. And now we're seeing how it's gone spreading like wildfire all over India, right? Like amazing take-up of Krishna consciousness, respect and appreciation of Srila Prabhupada's teaching, Srila Prabhupada's movement. So I hope to see that there will be an Indian takeover worldwide of spiritual knowledge. Nectar, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. About a month ago, I went to New York. I got this. I stayed for 2 nights in a hotel in the Bowery, in a Holiday Inn in the Bowery. The Bowery is nothing like what it was when Srila Prabhupada was there. Now it's like an arts and hipster kind of district. And we got to walk around some of the streets that Srila Prabhupada would have walked on. And we went to 26 2nd Avenue. We went inside and saw the very small room where Srila Prabhupada, some of his early followers, rented for him and was doing his programs. Got to look out the window and see up in his apartment. And we walked around that area, went to Tompkins Square Park and saw the tree. And it was very nice to be able to appreciate Srila Prabhupada in that setting. Phenomenal. Inconceivable. Krishna's spiritual potency, Swarup Shakti, manifests through his eternal associates in the material world for the benefit of conditioned souls. It's the only explanation for the amazing transcendental events that unfolded by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. at that time in New York, and the spreading of Krishna consciousness from there. Such a place. How is such a thing possible? And you think about that whole year where Srila Prabhupada was in that place on his own. So we have so much depth to Srila Prabhupada. And you could hear his determination in that letter, that industrialist. Such conviction and determination to serve his spiritual master. An eternal example of Krishna consciousness for everyone that comes after Srila Prabhupada. So, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Okay, I'm going to read from Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Nad Bhagavatam Paranam Amalam Yad Vaishnavanam Priyam Yasmin Paramahankyam Ekam Amalam Jnanam Param Giyate Tatra Jnana Vairagya Bhakti Sahitam Vaistamyam Avitam Tachin Vansi Patantakara Parabhya Naraha. Bhagavatam Ki Jai. So we're reading from 4th canto, chapter 22, which is entitled Prithu Maharaj's meeting with the 4 Kumaras, and we're reading from text number 29. Please repeat. Nimite sati savatra jalata api purushaha atmanascha parasyapi idam pasyati nanyada. Nimite sati savatra jalata api purushaha atmanashta parasyapi idam pasyati nanyada. Nimite sati savatra jalata api purushaha atmanashta parasyapi idam pasyati nanyada. Please. Someone else? Nope. Okay. Please repeat. Nimitte on account of causes. Sati, being. Savatra, everywhere. Jala ado api, water and other reflecting media. Purushaha, the person. Atmanaha, oneself. Cha, and parasya api, another's self. Vidam, differentiation. Differentiation. Pashyati, sees. Na anyada, there is no other reason. Translation. Only because of different causes does a person see a difference between himself and others. Just as one sees the reflection of a body appearing differently manifested on water, on oil, or in a mirror. Purport. The spirit soul is one, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is manifested in Shwangsha and Vibhinangsha expansions. The jivas are Vibhinamsha expansions. The different incarnations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are Swangsha expansions. Thus, there are different potencies of the Supreme Lord, and there are different expansions of the different potencies. In this way, for different reasons, there are different expansions of the same one principle, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is understanding real knowledge. But when the living entity is covered by the upadhi, or designated body, he sees differences, exactly as one sees differences in reflections of oneself on water, on oil, or in a mirror. When something is reflected on the water, it appears to be moving. When it is reflected on ice, it appears fixed. When it is reflected on oil, it appears hazy. The subject is one, but under different conditions, it appears differently. When the qualifying factor is taken away, the whole appears to be one. In other words, when one comes to the Paramahamsa, or perfectional stage of life, by practicing Bhakti Yoga, he sees only Krishna everywhere. For him, there is no other objective. In conclusion, due to different causes, the living entity is visible in different forms, as an animal, human being, demigod, tree, etc. Actually, every living entity is the marginal potency of the Supreme Lord. In Bhagavad Gita, chapter 5, text 18, therefore, it is explained, the one who actually sees the spirit soul does not distinguish between a learned Brahmin, a dog, an elephant, or a cow. Mandita samadashinaha. One who is actually learned sees only the living entity, not the outward covering. Differentiation is therefore the result of different karma, or fruitive activities. And when we stop fruitive activities, turning them into acts of devotion, we can understand that we are not different from anyone else, regardless of the form. This is only possible in Krishna consciousness. In this movement, there are many different races of men from all parts of the world participating. But because they think of themselves as servants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they do not differentiate between black and white, yellow and red. The Krishna consciousness movement is therefore the only means to make living entities free of all designation. Om Jnana-timirandasya Jnananjana-shalakaya Chakshurmritam Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Varam Rupa Karamayam Tarati Swaparantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Sriyuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sadhujatam Sahagana Raghunatha Vitam Tam Sujivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Vigana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Deva Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Name Govardhate Namaha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagate He Krishna Gopika Radha Santa Namaste Utapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavan Anurami Hari Anurami Hari. So I'll read this verse again, translation. Only because of different causes does a person see a difference between himself and others. Just as one sees the reflection of a body appearing differently manifested on water, on oil, or in a mirror. So this purport is very philosophical. Many interesting points made by Srila Prabhupada. So between now for the next 15 or 20 minutes, we'll maybe go through the report and make some comments and take any questions. I gathered some notes on some of the terms and points made in this report. So as we go, we can reference those also. Okay, so Srila Prabhupada starts off by saying the Spirit, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that's if you only made that statement in the class and walked out, then there'd be issues. We'd have concerns. Hold on, that doesn't sound like our philosophy. The Spirit Soul is one, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that's a fact. How is that a fact? When I was reading this part of the purport, what came up for me was that in the 12th century, there's Shankaracharya. And Shankaracharya, he propounded an impersonal view of the absolute truth. And actually, it might have even been earlier than that. I forget his actual time. He didn't live very long. I think he only lived for about 30 years. And it might have been the 9th century. I can't remember. I didn't put notes down on that. Anyway, he propounded a impersonal concept of the absolute truth. Essentially saying that every existence is God. Existence is all there is. There is only one existence, that is God. And our predicament is that we are under illusion and we do not realize that we are all one existence. He formulated very developed, advanced arguments to propound his theory, and he cited the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Vedanta Sutta to do that. These are Triprashnan, three fundamental sources of evidence from a authentic Vedic philosophical tradition. If you have a theory, you have to base it on Triprashnan, on these three sources of evidence. So Adi Shankaracharya's incarnation of Mahadev, Lord Shiva. So he's form of the Lord, and he's most expert at presenting an argument based on Shastra. and his influence is widespread. So much so that basically, even today, the main view, sort of default under the surface, kind of scratch a little bit into someone's spiritual understanding, and in India particularly, not just in India, but mostly in India. Anyone who subscribes to Vedic culture, Vedic knowledge, is there. His influence to this day, and it's naturally very attractive to the conditioned soul because you can get to it through mode of goodness thinking, and it facilitates sense gratification very well because it creates a dichotomy where there's spiritual reality and my life. And when I become enlightened, I'll be like that. And in the meantime, I'll just carry on with my sense gratification. And that spiritual understanding doesn't really interrupt my sense gratification very much. It kind of feeds it because actually, I am God. I'm actually God. So I can enjoy this. I can basically do whatever I like because I'm God. I'm just God in illusion. And when I realize that I'm no longer in illusion, I'll be part of God and I'll really be God. So I can play God in my little material life, enjoying myself independently. And when I achieve enlightenment, I'll merge into the oneness. Now, that was my slightly sarcastic presentation of it, but it's actually very refined philosophy. It's got a lot of backing in Shastra. There are traditions that have been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years, that support it. And it's a living philosophy. The Advaita Vedanta view is living. It's currently cultivated. There are huge schools in India where it's developed. They've got lineages of acharyas who have added tikas and commentaries and all forms of elaboration to Adi Shankaracharya's work and teachings. It is very sophisticated and very cultured, externally, materially, very sattvic. It looks very spiritual. It looks very authentic. It looks like this is Dharma. But it is a trick by Lord Shiva. This is described in Purana to facilitate the onset of Kali Yuga. Of our acharyas, Jiva Goswami in the Sandarbhas goes into details of breaking it down, breaking aspects of Advaita Vedanta down, and presenting Lord Chaitanya's teaching of Vedanta. Baladev Vidyabhushan, he, following Jiva Goswami, he does the same, and he presents books which one of them has over 21 arguments against Mayavad, and they're all based on Triprashna and are very complete and perfect dismantling of a very developed philosophy, developed by very high level understanding of Sanskrit language and grammar. Like the Advaita Vedantins, they have got very sophisticated knowledge of Sanskrit and very sophisticated knowledge of Sanskrit grammar and how to derive word meanings that very much suit the Siddhanta that they're putting forward. So it was Ramanujacharya who came after Shankaracharya and presented his Vishishta Advaita philosophy. Vishishta Advaita. So Advaita means non-dual. Dvaita means dual. Advaita means non-dual, one. So he presented a Vishishta Advaita. Vishishta means qualified, specified, qualified oneness. So how is everything one? Adi Shankaracharya is saying that everything is one. Advaitavad, which we call Mayavad. Mayavad's different from Brahmavad, different from impersonalism in a righteous sense, in a true sense. There is the impersonal aspect of God, Brahman, and a philosophical understanding of Brahman is valid. And Brahman is an eternal spiritual perfection that can be attained, and there is an authentic process, Jnana Yoga, that leads to attainment of Brahman. That's all real and true. It's just not complete. It doesn't explain the absolute truth in fullness as Bhagavan, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Mayavad is Advaita Vedanta, misconstrued presentation of Shastra, which is basically allowing Maya to be more powerful than the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because Maya has the ability to cut and cover Brahman, the Jiva, the living being. So Mayavad is the Vad, the speech, the presentation of Maya. Mayavad. It's our term. It's a Vaishnava term for Advaita Vedanta. They don't refer to themselves as Mayavad. They refer to themselves as Advaita Vedanta. Ramanujacharya, he presented Vishishta Advaita, which is qualified oneness. And you see that our Gaudiya Vaishnava Vedanta, Siddhanta, is very much derived from Ramanujacharya and Madhvacharya. Here, the spirit soul is one, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Ramanujacharya here, he explains how that is so, by qualifying oneness. Bhagavan, Shakti, Shaktiman. So there is Shaktiman, the possessor of the potency, and Shakti, the potency. This is Bhagavan. This is Krishna. This is God. It's not just all, it's all one. It's one object. Prabhupada says in the end, for him there is no other objective. There is only one object. Sanatana Goswami puts it like this. This is a quote from Sanatana Goswami. I'll mention it now because it's kind of relevant to the line of thinking that I'm sort of following. He says, for those who know, so this is comment by Sanatana Goswami from 10th Canto Bhagavatam, 14th chapter, text 56. The verse goes like this. For those who know, this is a translation to that verse. It goes, for those who know, there is no other object than Krishna in this universe. He is all animate and inanimate objects and all forms of the Lord. This is a description of Krishna. Vastuta janatam atra Krishnam stasnu charishnu cha. Stasnu means standing, inanimate. Charishnu means moving. So animate and inanimate object. Cha, and. So both of those. Atra, there Krishna is both of those things. Bhagavad Rupam Akilam Nanyad Vastu Iha Kinchana. He is all animate and inanimate objects and all forms of the Lord. Bhagavad Rupam Akilam. He's Krishna, he's everything. He's all forms of the Lord. He's all Vishnu Tattva. He's everything. He's all Vishnu Tattva. He's all forms of the Lord, and he's everything that exists. He's all animate and inanimate things. This animate and inanimate, you see it a lot in Shastra as a kind of a device, a terminology to basically describe everything, because everything is either still or moving. It's kind of, it's a good way to kind of classify everything in existence. It's either still or moving. That's everything basically. So Krishna is everything. Everything is Krishna. There's nothing but Krishna. Shaktiman, Shakti. He is everything. So he is the possessor of potency, and he is the potency. You can't say he's not the potency. So Ramanuja gives the example of the sun. and the energy of the sun. And it's a perfect example. It works. It explains how Krishna is everything. The sun globe, the sun planet, is one object. It has energy, the light and the heat that come from that object. You can't separate light and heat from the sun. They're inseparable. They are the Swarup Lakshana, primary attributes, primary characteristics of the object sun. You can't separate them. If it hasn't got light and heat coming out of it, it's not the sun. It's something else. You can't separate light and heat from the sun. They're totally inseparable. Light and heat are the sun. At the same time, you can't say that the light that's here in this room, that's giving us light to see one another, is the sun. Because the sun, if the sun was here, nothing else would be here. At the same time, it's not the sun. Heat, similarly, is the energy of the sun. You can't separate it from the sun. So the Shakti, the heat and the light, and the Shaktiman, the possessor of the heat and the light, they are one thing. They are one object. Yet, you can talk about them as attributes. You can talk about light as an attribute of the sun. But it is a Swarup Lakshana. Lakshana means attribute or characteristic. Swarup means primary, its own. It means Swa means own, and Rup means form. So its own. Swarup Lakshana means its own attribute. So the Swarup Lakshana of sun is heat and light. It's its own attribute. So it's not actually separate from the object. It's one object. So it's just one thing. So Sanatana Goswami goes on to say in his commentary, he said, Bhagavan, so that verse I just read, for those who know, there is no other object than Krishna in existence. He is all animate and inanimate object in all forms of the Lord. Commentary, Bhagavan is defined. So that is the definition. There's a definition of Bhagavan. He's everything. What's Bhagavan? He's all existent. He's everything. He is directly realized as the highest cause in which all things reside. And then he says this line, which is great. He says, no other class of things exists. So all existence can be categorized into classes. Classes is that class, classification of objects is how you identify things. But everything can be classified into a category. Here, one who knows this knows that there's actually only one class of objects in existence, and that class is Krishna. That category is Krishna. That's all that there is. So that's the wonder of our Vedanta philosophy. Krishna is everything. So then Prabhupada goes on, he says, he is manifested in Anksha and Vivinanksha expansion. So these two terms, he is so this one absolute truth, he is manifested in Swa Anksha. So Swa again means own, and Anksha means part, his own parts, in other words, Vishnu forms, all of his own expansions. And Vivin, here this means different. It means to cut up, or it means differentiated. It means different. It means aside from. It means parts. Vivin Anksha. It means this. It means separated. It means separated. To separate something. Bina Prakriti Ashtada. Krishna uses the same term in the Gita, but regarding Prakriti, regarding material nature. He says Bina Prakriti. He says that Prakriti is Bina, is split up into 8 things, right? How's it go? Bhumi, Apalo, and Alo, Vayu. Thank you. Yeah. So he says it's split up. Prakriti has got these 8 divisions: 3 subtle, 5 gross. Bina. So Vibhinanksha means the separated parts of Krishna. What are they? That's all of us. That's the jivas. We're the Vibhinanksha. These two terms, they come from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter 22. Sanatana Goswami, Lord Chaitanya is explained to Sanatana Goswami. Chaitanya Charitamrita is compilation by Krishnadas Kaviraj of all the Purva Acharya's teachings, the Goswami literature. Mahaprabhu's Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's philosophy and teaching is presented and given by the Goswamis, by the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, Sanatana, Rupa, etc. They are the primary acharyas of the Gaudiya Sampradaya. They hold our Siddhanta, represent our Siddhanta and our practice of Krishna consciousness. They define it, they give it. It comes from them, it doesn't come from anyone else. Lord Chaitanya gave that to them to do. That was their service. He didn't, other than Shikshashtaka, he didn't write. He got them to do it. They did that work. Not even Advaita or Nityananda Prabhu, Gadadhar Pandit, who was speaking on Bhagavatam daily from Puri and initiating disciples. But it was the Goswamis who had that task of compiling the philosophy, the teaching, because it's very unique. Our view on Bhagavatam is unique to Lord Chaitanya, unique to Lord Chaitanya's teaching. The Goswami view of Krishna and Krishna Leela and Bhakti Yoga is unique to our Sampradaya and Lord Chaitanya. It's not anywhere else. They give our angular vision, our paradigm on Bhagavatam, on the absolute truth, on what going back to Godhead means for us. It means something totally different in other Sampradayas. It's not the same. So Chaitanya Charitamrita captures all of that Goswami literature, teachings succinctly. Krishnadas Kaviraj, he does that. That's his amazing contribution. Because he was with Raghunath Das Goswami, he was with the Goswamis, and he had the opportunity to hear from Raghunath Das Goswami every day. Raghunath Das Goswami was at Radhakund speaking about Lord Chaitanya for 3 hours a day. He had opportunity to read the Goswami literature as they were written and published and printed. So Chaitanya Charitamrita is the presentation of the teachings of Mahaprabhu's associate. So there we find this Shwangsha and Vibhinangsha, and it comes from Sandarbhas, it comes from Paramatma Sandarbha, from Jiva Goswami. Jiva Goswami is explaining the Angshas of Krishna, the heart. So here we have the Supreme Personality of Godhead is everything, the Shakti and Shaktiman. Well, how is he qualified? How are there these parts? Well, what are these parts? What comprises this one object, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Bhagavan? Angsha. Swangsha, his own forms, and Vibhinangsha, the forms of the living entity. And where does that come from? Because nothing comes from nowhere, everything comes from somewhere. That comes from Madhvacharya. So we're in the Madhvacharya's line, and he quotes from Varaha Purana. That in the Varaha Purana, these two terms are used to describe Bhagavan and his part. So this is our sound, solid, clear perspective of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so what do we do with this? We act on this in our sadhana. Everything is Krishna's energy to be used in Krishna's service. Everything is Krishna's energy to be used in Krishna's service. Not that this is something separate. This is mine, and I'll use it for Krishna. Now, this is Krishna's, and I'll use it in Krishna's service. It's the difference between a mixed view and a pure view of bhakti. Everything is, so pure transcendental knowledge produces pure faith, which produces a pure sadhana, a pure practice, which results in a pure sadhya, a pure result. So this transcendental knowledge results in, how do we, if Prabhupada says it's seen, it's experienced by a Paramahansa, but it's not only Paramahansas that are supposed to understand it. All Vaishnavas are supposed to understand the philosophy in order to be able to act on it. If we don't, it's transcendental knowledge that purifies our material conception of life. Krishna says in Gita, 4th chapter text 10 and 11. The transcendental knowledge purifies the consciousness because it gives the right perception of reality by which to function. It purifies the intelligence. Purified intelligence means you know things as they are. To know things as they are means to know that everything is Krishna, everything is Krishna's, everything is to be used in Krishna's service, not mine. Surrender means to apply that. Let me apply that in my life, practically. That's Sharanagati, that's surrender. Sarvadharma Prithyaja. This is Krishna, not for my enjoyment. This is for Krishna's service. And in absorption in Krishna consciousness, because there's Krishna consciousness and then all those things in our lives that support Krishna consciousness, they're not always the same. It's not that even preaching Krishna consciousness may not be Krishna consciousness. You can be preaching Krishna consciousness but not be in Krishna consciousness. There's a difference between Krishna consciousness and preaching Krishna consciousness. The Krishna consciousness is the thing that you're preaching. And the activities in our lives that support our Krishna consciousness are the activities that support the Krishna consciousness. They're not the Krishna consciousness themselves. Krishna consciousness is where you're thinking about Krishna with devotion, where you're absorbed in Krishna, Swayam Bhagavan, who resides in his abode, who is engaged in his eternal Leela. To be absorbed in Krishna is Krishna consciousness. And anything that we do that supports our absorption in Krishna consciousness is supporting our Krishna consciousness. But when we're out and about working all day to maintain our bodies, we may not necessarily be in Krishna consciousness. It may be favorable to our Krishna consciousness, but we may not necessarily be in Krishna consciousness when we're doing it. We can be, if we choose to be, if we deepen our Krishna consciousness to be, but not necessarily. It's not that marriage is Krishna consciousness. Getting married is not going to make you Krishna conscious in of itself. It's just marriage. It's Krishna consciousness that makes you Krishna conscious. And engaging in Krishna consciousness is hearing and chanting about Krishna. That's the primary Swarup Anga of Bhakti. It's those activities, hearing and chanting, that make us Krishna conscious. Now, everything else that we do, if it's favorable to our Krishna consciousness, it won't obstruct our becoming Krishna. But chanting Hare Krishna in Kirtan before Radha and Giridhari is a totally different activity to whatever we do for our work or whatever other external mundane activity we do that's connected to our life to serve our Krishna consciousness. So we need to feed our primary practices of bhakti. And that comes up here very nicely, just in a couple of verses ago. The devotee should gradually increase the culture of devotional service. How do we gradually increase the culture of our devotional service? The culture here refers to cultivation. It's like the culture of the development, the anukulyena. This means anukulyena. It means to cultivate, to do it, to follow and to nurture it. Krishna anushilanam, anushilanam, anushilanam. The devotee should gradually, this is text 25, the same chapter, just a few verses back. The devotee should gradually increase the culture of devotional service. How? By constant, Prabhupada uses this term here, constant hearing of the transcendental qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's the constant hearing that will cultivate our culture of devotional service. If we want to cultivate devotional service, do more hearing and make it more meaningful. Hear in a way that is going to nourish your bhakti. Hear in a way that's going to nourish your taste, your absorption in Krishna. Hear that which nourishes your absorption in Krishna. If it's nourishing your absorption in Krishna, if you want to do it because you're becoming more and more absorbed in Krishna, then do that. Hear that. Cultivate that. Follow that. Culture by hearing the transcendental qualities of he says the transcendental qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then he says, these pastimes are like ornamental decorations on the ears of devotees. So devotees wear earrings. I was going to say lady devotees wear earrings, but it's not the case anymore. All male, female, different genders, they all wear earrings. Krishna wears earrings, why not? So these should be the ornaments of our ears, the hearing of Krishna's. And here it says the transcendental, He says these pastimes of Krishna, the Leela of Krishna, it's very important to hear Krishna Leela. By rendering devotional service and transcending the material qualities, one can easily be fixed in transcendence in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it's through this hearing process that this understanding that Krishna is everything and all things are a manifestation of Krishna will come to our experience. And actually what we see will then inspire our remembrance of Krishna, because we'll see that everything in this world is a reflection of reality, is a reflection of the real form of all objects which are found in the spiritual world. And even the objects of this world can remind us of the objects of that world. We see a beautiful garden, we can remember Krishna. We can remember Krishna in Vrindavan. Everything, every attribute, every element of existence is ultimately an attribute of the Lord and can stimulate our remembrance of Krishna. That is the effect of transcendental knowledge in the heart. Okay, so I've rambled. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I'm going to stop there. Any comments, questions? Very quiet. Yes. Yeah, you could do a good go to Vedabase and do a search for those terms and see what Prabhupada says. In one place you'll see that he basically says they're all descriptions of Krishna. There are subtle differences, and that's why they're there. There are differences. Like if you study each one of the different, there's another place where Prabhupada says that the devotee should study Vedanta Sutra, should study the commentaries of Vaishnavacharya. But of course, primarily, initially, we are wanting to get all of that understanding directly from Srila Prabhupada. But there are differences. There are differences. Differences in the categorization of things, like the way that the Jiva Tattva is explained is a little bit different. The way that the spiritual world is explained is a little bit different. And in Madhvacharya's philosophy, there's also some slight differences. There's a book called Four Vaishnava Sampradayas in English by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. This gives a very good summary. It's quite small, like that. It's about 5 or 6 pages on each, maybe 10 on each of the 4 Vaishnavacharya commentaries on Vedanta. And there he goes over their Siddhanta, their practices, and like that is. Yeah, he goes over the Siddhanta and practices of each one, and it kind of, if you read it, study it, you can kind of see that there's some subtle differences. Like one that I've just come to mind was how Ramanujacharya, there's a concept of mukti that they have, going back to Godhead, that you only attain a 4-arm form of Narayan, like similar to Narayan. Right? But in Madhvacharya's Siddhanta explanation, he explains that you can attain any form in Vaikuntha. Even non-human form. So that's just one example that just came to mind. I did some time studying it, and it was very enlivening at the time. I think the best thing about that for me was that the conclusion, the kind of the accumulative effect was that don't get distracted with all of these other things. Just focus on Chaitanya Charitamrita, because we've got a particular mission of going back to Godhead according to what that means for us as Gaudiya Vaishnavas. And if you kind of get interested in Vaikuntha, these Vaikuntha Murtis, and because the different Vaishnava Sampradayas, they're Vaishnavas, but they're promoting Vaidhi Bhakti and they're promoting Narayan worship. We're not interested in Narayan worship. We want to worship Krishna and Braj. It's a totally different goal, different purpose. So we shouldn't get distracted with the Narayan form. Raghunath Das Goswami talks about that quite strongly in Manashiksha. He says that there shouldn't be any interest in Narayan. Lakshmi Pati Tyaktva. He says, Lakshmi Pati Tyaktva. Tyaktva means to give up. Lakshmi Pati means a husband of Lakshmi. So forms of Narayan we should give up. Because like we just read, Krishna is supreme. Krishna is the supreme personality of God, it's Swayam Bhagavan. He's the object of worship. And he, as Bhagavan, has qualities that they don't have. So Lord Chaitanya is giving something very special. We don't waste time with other things. So what he's do, and that's a deviation. It is though. It's a waste of time. It's not what we're supposed to be doing. It's not what Prabhupada gave us. Prabhupada gave us Braj Krishna. There he is. Giridhari, Radha Giridhari. There's only one Radha Giridhari. Yeah, great place to come back to. So, yeah, that was the conclusion. But it is good, kind of, in some then I think philosophical, build out my understanding a little bit, deepen my faith. And that's because our bhakti is based on faith. You can only give yourself to Krishna to the degree that your faith is there. It's based on faith, Shraddha. So, but our philosophy is to be experienced. This is the thing. I was in Oxford 4 days ago, listening. I was waiting for someone outside the shop at college, and there was this Christian preacher, and it's going, it's all shallow, nothing to experience. There's only to believe. But the result of our knowledge should be an experience in bhakti. And if the experience is not there as a result of application, it means there's something wrong in our practice that we need to address. We need some guidance, we need some help, we need to look at, we need to go back to Shastra and deepen. Because this is an experiential process of reality. Based on faith, but the faith is based on knowledge. Every action is based on faith. To walk across the ground, you have to believe you're not going to fall into it. That's based on knowledge. The knowledge has either come from prior experience, because you've walked on ground before, or you believe someone that's told you that. But still, your action is based on a form of faith. Faith, in our view, in our school's view, is not religious faith. It's the basis of action. And action leads to an experience. And faith is based on knowledge. So that's the benefit of studying Shastra, hearing, is that our faith becomes deepened and our actions can become deeper. Actions meaning our thoughts, our words, our deeds. Yeah. But the details of that question you have to sort of study for yourself and get the benefits of. Yeah. I'll go messages and then Prabhu's. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Like Krishna says, Anusmara Yujacha in Gita, right? He says, Anusmara, he says, remember Anusmara Yujacha. Yuja means to fight. So whilst fighting, remember me. So that's the idea in yoga, is that whilst doing, we're also remembering Krishna. So how do we cultivate bhakti that is rich, enlivening, tasty, and deep enough to want to always be thinking about Krishna rather than other things? Because the mind can do more than one thing at once, right? You can cook, you can also look after your child, you can also tell your husband something, and you can also be listening to a kirtan. I mean, that's at least 4 things at once, right? So we can do multiple things at once. So we have the capacity to be absorbed in Krishna always. That's why words like Ananyas Chintayam Tomam, it's not just there. Ananya means always. Prabhupada said earlier in text 25, constant hearing. These things aren't there just, so Kirtanya Sadahari, Sada means always. These words aren't used whimsically, they're used because it's possible to always be absorbed in Krishna. But how? By practicing good hearing and chanting and following you'll think about what you want to think about. Like the example is the wife who's having an affair, thinking about the lover whilst maintaining a very external, because she wants to think about the lover, she gets her pleasure from that. So where do we get our taste? So that our thing. We've got so much attraction to the material energy. Because we've got so much attraction to the material energy, I'm a conditioned soul attracted to the material energy, would rather be absorbed there. What's the effect? What's the experience of that absorption in comparison to meditating on Krishna, thinking about Krishna? You know, what's the experience when you sit and hear about Krishna? And the experience when you're absorbed in, you know, it's like light and day. So what would we rather be? So that is ruchi. That's cultivation of bhakti. It evolves, it accumulates. Bhakti accumulates. Balanswami was talking about that. You know, group shakti, it accumulates in the bhakta as the devotee surrenders more. So group shakti is internal potency, is knowledge and bliss. They increase, they accumulate in the heart. Bhakti latches onto the jiva and accumulates. So as our bhakti accumulates, our absorption in Krishna will accumulate. And we can, yeah. But so then I'm thinking of this example where Prabhupada was sat somewhere and he was, I think there was an insect going over a table, something, and then Prabhupada said something, made an example of it, and sort of said, I'm always thinking about how to explain how you're not the body. He said, I'm always thinking about how to explain you're not the body. So in service, we also meditate on doing our service. We do our things properly, we do them well for Krishna's pleasure. That is a form of Krishna consciousness. But we do want to come to always thinking about Krishna. And that's what our sadhana is. That's what our sadhana is. It's not just our perfection. It's our sadhana. The verse on sadhana is text 8 of Nectar of Instruction. The verse on sadhana is text 8. That explains what to do. That's not the goal. That's how to achieve. Sadhana is bhakti, so bhakti is, you know, you could argue, well, it is the goal in one sense, but it's the means as well. So, so that's what we are supposed to be cultivating, and that's what that will come. The essence of all advice is one should utilize one's full time, 24 hours a day. This is text 8, Nectar of Instruction. In nicely chanting and remembering the Lord's divine name, transcendental form, qualities, and eternal pastimes, thereby gradually engaging one's tongue and mind. Mind also, not just the tongue, the mind. Mano Dharma, bhakti. What is the path that we are following in the mind? In this way, one should reside in Braja Goloka Vrindavan and serve under the guidance of devotees. One should follow in the footsteps of the Lord's beloved devotees, who are deeply attached to his devotional service. This is the practice of Krishna consciousness, this verse. This verse is describing the practice, the actual sadhana. So as our sadhana deepens, then that constant absorption will be there. It will be there. And we can say that Shraddha to Nishta means effort. It's yoga, it's effort. You slacken off, you go down. Put foot on the pedal, you get more experience. So there is the onus on the individual to take ownership of sadhana, take ownership of Krishna consciousness. We have to. No one else is going to do it for us. It's not going to fall out of the sky. It's not just going to appear one day. We're not going to wake up necessarily one more Krishna conscious than we were the previous day. You know, we might if we had a good night the night before, or we had a nice dream about Krishna, or something happened. But it's not just going to fall out of the sky. We have to actually make an endeavor. As Nitya Buddha conditioned jivas, we have to surrender. We have to try. I'm speaking to myself. Yeah, I need to do this. But we have to endeavor. So we have to endeavor to engage the mind. And the mind is a thing of habit. The mind is a thing of habit. He had this god brother. He's not around anymore, but he made this nice example of I forgot his name as well. Anyway, he used to wear glasses. He was a vegan. And he had this example of a ice ring. He said the mind is like an ice ring. I don't know where he got it from, but it's a good example. And he said, like in an ice ring, the ice skates, they cause grooves in the ice. He says the mind is like an ice ring, and the grooves in the ice are like samskaras. They're your actions, are the things that you do. They make grooves in the ice, and then you just kind of slide on the grooves and kind of follow a natural flow. Mind's like that. It's sattvic by nature. and you can shape it by your habits. So if you endeavor to absorb the mind in Krishna by following your taste in Krishna consciousness, it will like to do that more than anything else. But we have to be connected to the substance in order to do that. Yeah, yeah, we can cultivate it. Yeah, and Krishna's pleased by that cultivation. But Prabhu. Yeah. 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 Thanks. Nice question. So my advice would be to study Chaitanya Charitamrita, where the description is of the Lord and his expansions, which is in Madhya Lila, and chapters. I'm trying to think of the specific section. It's either 21 or 22. There's a nice description of the expansions of the Lord. And that is based on Rupa Goswami's Laghu Bhagavatamrita. Laghu Bhagavatamrita, which Gopi Prandana Prabhu has presented, translated, and commented on, gives a very comprehensive explanation of Rupa Goswami's presentation of Krishna as Swayam Bhagavan. And that is a good topic of hearing to develop the right perspective, because Advaita Achyutam and Anadim and Antarupam, all the forms of Advaita, they're non-different from one another. They're all infallible Achyutam, and there's unlimited forms in Adim. So a devotee's understanding from the perspective of Tattva, even prior to love, where Raghunath Goswami was telling me back there, he has love, and he's speaking from that platform. But he's also speaking in Manashiksha for sadhakas, so that they have the right angle of vision and the right aim. So that's about tattva, that's about philosophical understanding. So that should also be there. And then when we understand that Krishna is Swayam Bhagavan, then when we see his expansions as Narayan or Sita or Ram, we can see, look how Krishna has those characteristics. So then we see they remind us of Vrindavan and Krishna. So like we worship Lord Jagannath. So we worship Lord Jagannath, who's in Dwarka. But he's Dwarka, Dish Krishna, who's hankering for Vrindavan. So he's sending us back to Vrindavan. So our whole altar is Vrindavan. It's all Vrindavan. It's either reflecting back into Vrindavan with Jagannath, or sending us to Vrindavan from Gaurnatai, a Radhagiri area in the center of Virat. So everything for us is about coming back to Krishna, Swayam Bhagavan. So when we see his expansions, like when we see Ram's devotion to Sita, we think, to see how much we can remember. This Ekapatni Vrata, this one point of devotion, is a expansion of his love for Radharani, who he has one pointed fixed intention on. So if a devotee hears Ram Lila, it will give them appreciation of Krishna. But they may not choose to hear that much Ram Lila, because if they've only got a little bit of time, they might think, well, what am I going to spend my time on? I'm going to spend my time on Ram Lila, or I'm going to spend my time on Krishna Lila. Depends on your time. And then circumstances, it's Ram Navami, we hear about Ram, we appreciate. So my point is to be clear about we're Krishna, like Prabhupada's comment, Krishna, the supreme, not comment, but statement of perfect Siddhanta, Krishna, the supreme personality of Godhead. So then all of the other expansions of the Lord, they all come into that view, and we can appreciate them as expansions of Krishna. They bring us back to Krishna in our remembrance. But not to become, I'm going to install a deity of such and such, or such, that's, in my perspective, that's not what our time is for. Yeah. Now, again, Prabhupada installed Sitaram, Lakshmana Hanuman. I saw them at the manor, beautiful. And Sita Devi is very merciful. So that was for a purpose of preaching and attracting people to come to the temple. People who are attracted to Ram, to bring them into Lord Chaitanya's movement and into Lord Chaitanya's teachings, to give them the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he did it in Bombay, he did it in the manor. Well, he didn't do it in the manor, Jai Tirtha did it in the manor. But he did it in Bombay, and following that, Jai Tirtha took that example, because there's a huge Indian community there. And it works. Many people come. But when they come, we give them the philosophy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Okay, I'm going to finish this great late. Hare Krishna. Prabhupada ki jai.